Hello, and welcome to episode 547 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my good buddy, co-host, author, historian, wearing his purple shirt, John Parshall. How are you, John?
I'm well. I'm well, thank you. I'm about 97% of the way there. I got just a couple more chunks of proof editing to get in on the monstrosity, and then I'll be done with that sucker.
The
And we have
monstrosity.
with us another author of monstrosities, and we're delighted to have her. But Seth, I'm going to let you do the intro because you guys have the relationship. So do
Yeah,
your thing.
so if you're watching, you can see the third member of the crew here today is New York Times bestselling author Sara Vladic. She wrote the book on Indianapolis. When did you write that, Sarah? That was a
Yeah,
while back now.
2018, that
Yeah,
one came
yeah,
out.
it's
Yeah.
been some time. And that's but
Yeah.
what that's not what we're here to talk about today, even though we
Yeah.
would like to do that again
Yeah.
in the future. We're here to talk about your new book. And the new book is something that people that have watched our show have been asking about for a long time for us to cover various aspects of this, and we will, starting today. And that, of course, is the American home front and various portions thereof. And your book is entitled The Dangerous Shore. It comes out this episode when it releases. Actually, I think your book will already be out, but it comes out this March. Sarah, tell us, first of all, welcome to the show. And
Yeah.
second, tell us about this book. Why in the heck did you want to write this? What led you to this?
Yeah, what psychosis, led to this
Why?
exercise? Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Why?
Well, first, thanks for having me, and
Yeah.
it's, good company here. And yeah,
Debatable.
the book, it honestly it started out with a mutual friend of ours, Kirk Wolfinger,
Hmm.
and he introduced the idea of Eagle 56. And Kirk and I had worked together on the Finding the USS Indianapolis, the PBS special where they were live from the deep. And
Hmm.
And is that how you two know each other, you
um,
and Seth? How did you?
Yes and no. So I've known of Sarah for a while. Sarah is good friends with former co-host and our mutual friend, Bill Tody.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, it makes
the
sense.
Indianapolis
Indianapolis,
relationship there is obviously
right?
very thick. And I
yeah,
met Sarah at Mare Island. Well, yeah, it
yeah,
was at Mare
yeah,
Island, Benicia,
hmm
California for the Indianapolis reunion.
yeah,
What was that, 3 years ago now?
yeah,
Jeez,
yeah.
God.
That went quick.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
As they say, the days are long, but the years are short. But anyway, yeah. So that's where we met, and I'd already read Indianapolis years ago, but you know,
yeah,
not Anyway, that being said,
right.
um,
Kirk Wolfinger. Sorry, I yoinked it
Kirk,
off.
yeah,
Okay,
Kirk is a mutual friend of all of ours. John, you were on Lost Ships of World War II. I was on Lost Ships of World War II. Sarah, you did the Indianapolis thing, and Kirk was
Mhm.
kind of the puppet master behind all of this stuff. And yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, Kirk's got his
I,
fingers on a lot of pies.
he does. He does. He's fantastic, and he
Yeah, he
he has
is.
all these great ideas. And he at the time was looking for Eagle 56. They were out doing, filming, searching for that ship. And
I don't even know
with
what that is.
well, you're about to find out. No, no. Well, you have to read the book. No, I'm just kidding. No, so Eagle was a World War One kind of sub chaser utility ship sort of thing. This
Patrol.
little
Mhm.
tiny, not so pretty ship, but very, hardy, if you will. And
Right.
it had a similar story to Indianapolis in that it was sunk at the end of World War II, and they wrote it off as a boiler explosion, and it really was a German submarine that sank it, and there were witnesses, but the person who was in charge of the court martial and the investigation was the same person who would have been in trouble for letting he was the essentially the port authority. So he was the one that should have been reprimanded for allowing a U-boat to get 3 miles off the coast of Maine. So of course it
Got
was
it.
now a boiler explosion, and
Right.
these 13 survivors of this ship tried to fight to get it rectified forever, and it wasn't until they found the ship real I mean there was a gentleman by the name of Paul Lawton who really went and investigated and did all the work and found all the evidence and proved it. But when they found the ship, they found that the boiler was intact. And there,
Go on.
Yes.
Do tell.
Amazingly so.
Mm.
And so then it was rectified. So that was kind of where my role came in with Kirk, in that he's like, well, this is just, another thing like Indy, where the captain and everybody in the crypt, the crew of the ship are all, they want redemption. They
Justice.
didn't, it wasn't a crew fault. They weren't given Purple Hearts. They weren't given benefits for being, you know,
Yeah.
anything of that nature. And so it was finally rectified. And that was like 2019. It wasn't,
Wow.
this was very current. So I look into this, and, there'd been a book about Eagle, but not a lot about it really, just that specific incident. That was all that anyone talked about. And as I was digging and digging and digging, I'm seeing like all these different storylines that are all tied to this together. And essentially it turned into this defense of the home front book that I didn't even see coming. And it got bigger and big, the fish got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right, right.
And it was just really, really cool to see that there was so many interconnected stories about the home front. And I couldn't believe, my whole career had been, being a subject matter expert on the Pacific. So I was, frankly, really not that educated on the Battle of the Atlantic and the nuances of it and all the details. And so this was like brand new treasure hunting for me, And
Yeah,
so I started investigating and finding these stories. And of course, most of the individuals were long gone, but their children were still alive. And
right.
so they have their diaries, they have ward, deck logs, they have all these different things. And then on the home front side of it, there were letters home, there were spouses, there were all these things that still had these stories in, their attics and their treasure chests and their whatnot, that allowed me to give a sense of like what actually happened here. Like we know about the Rosie the Riveters, and we know about,
Sure.
the industrial side, but rarely do we know the scientists, the Civil Air Patrol pilots, the
Hmm.
Mafia, and all those
Right.
people that essentially like saved us from going to war on our own soil and never got credit because they weren't military. They didn't come home war heroes. They had a lot of them had PTSD, even though they never left American soil. So
Interesting.
it affected them in ways, and they had survivor's guilt. Like, many of the, and the scientists and the engineers and whatnot that weren't allowed to go to war because they were more valuable in the
Right.
capacity of like designing technology and whatnot. Their neighbors lost
Yeah.
sons. They were part of ROTC units. They were part of these things, and everyone died. And they're getting kind of blackballed by the community for, why aren't you going to war?
Yeah.
Well, they're working on top secret things. They can't talk about it. So it was just this kind of interesting impact that I had never seen before. Even you study all the
Yeah.
war things, you don't study the home things. So
Yeah.
that was so fascinating. And the book got thicker and thicker and thicker. And here we are, 600 pages later. So
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah. I there's a common theme there for me too, in the easy thing to have done after Shattered Sword would have to be to write another book on the PTO because that was my safe space.
mhm,
But I was really intrigued just by 1942 as a whole and wanted to educate myself on new areas that I had not ventured into before. And it sounds like you ended up in very much the same sort of thing, trying to come up to speed on stuff that you really weren't necessarily comfortable about.
absolutely. And, there's nothing more humbling than when you start researching something and you don't know enough to ask the right questions. And, you go to
Yeah,
experts, and you quite frankly sound like an idiot when you ask things that you have, you don't know the big scope to know how to ask the nuance question. And then, you're learning. I felt like I was learning until I turned that final draft in. I was learning. And
right.
that was really kind of fun again. It
Yeah,
wasn't to be like, oh, you know everything on this thing. Well, now all of a sudden you
Can't
know
know everything.
nothing about
Yeah.
this thing.
Can't
right.
know everything. Can't know
Yeah,
everything. So what, speaking of knowing everything or not knowing everything, there had to have been some aha or oh my moments as you're going through this. I mean, I know for myself, and I know John, you too, we both had moments where you're like, holy, I didn't know this. What stood out to you as maybe the biggest aha or oh my moment when you're doing this?
The number of spies that we had,
Mhm.
albeit they weren't incredible at their jobs. Like we see these movies of spies and you think, oh, they're these suave, intelligent,
James Bond.
calculating spies. And they, in fact, were not. They were everyday people, but they were sent over and there were quite a few of them.
Like how
And
many?
so that was just fascinating to me to see that, like, how do you know your neighbor isn't someone, you know, feeding information to the wrong people per se,
Yeah.
not to plant that seed, but it was very interesting to see, just they were all like everyday people and blundering and often like really like had no self-confidence. They all this, they were just these individuals that could be the person next door to you. So that was kind of an interesting,
Like
idea that I had never known before.
how many are we talking? I mean, I knew that the Germans made a somewhat serious effort to put agents over here, but are we talking dozens, hundreds? What?
There were hundreds of informants, not to the level of, I would say, like an, infiltrated spy. There were dozens of spies, more so Japanese. That's what I was actually surprised about, was the number of Japanese spies and the correspondence and, just sending in communications on the West Coast, all the way up to Washington, down to California, down to San Diego, even, like, just the communications, ship traffic, the number of resources we have, personnel, if is a ship in repair, is it out to sea, that kind of stuff. Just those, and there's literally like hundreds of thousands of communications that were going back and forth that, I had no idea.
Had no idea either.
Yeah.
That's,
How?
if I was gonna say, if you look at like, wartime newsreels or movies, Hollywood movies and things like that, even things that were made even before the war, but especially during the war, that's one thing that they play up a lot is the spy, the potential spy,
Fifth column
fifth
Mhm.
column.
concept.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Right.
that kind of thing in the United States. And a lot of people believe still to this day that that was a lot of hoopla, that it was
Mhm.
just, it was more paranoia than anything. But I've said for years, I mean, the Germans got information from somewhere. The
Right.
Japanese got information, from somewhere. It didn't just poof spring up out of, thin air. They'd most certainly had spies in the United States, and it was a very real threat. And I think that's a fascinating topic that we could certainly get into at a later date in depth because it is
Yeah.
fascinating. But it was a real deal. I mean, it was not, Hollywood make believe. It was real.
No, and you can actually, I mean, so one of the things I stumbled upon, and even, the book would have been 900 pages had I had my way about it. No one would have read it. But I have those communications. Though I literally have all of those decoded and, decrypted messages that were the traffic are going back. So you can hold those, like they are
yeah,
available. And
That's
to me,
cool.
that's wild. But there was other things like that where, not just the spies, but the double agent spy, that was another thing, like how we were working that side of things. And that surprised me and how involved they were in Detroit,
oh,
so there was just all these little stories that opened up a can of worms. I guess that would, and we could spend hours on each one of them, and
yeah,
they're fascinating. But I kept being surprised, and the interconnectedness too, with all of it. It wasn't just like, oh, this is a standalone story and this is a standalone. It was like, well, this person, for example, there's a
I was going
gentleman
to say,
named
give us
Joe
an
Desch.
example.
Yeah,
yeah,
okay. So Joe Desch is the guy who invented the American bomb, BOMBE bomb, which was the
yeah,
machine, that worked with decoding and essentially the cryptology part of the story, right?
yeah.
And Joe's last name is Desch. And one of the spies that landed in New York was George Dash.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
when
Sure enough.
Joe was going through his security clearances, they had just captured George Dash,
Okay,
and they both had ties to Dayton, Ohio. And Joe Desch was from Germany. He was born in the U.S., but his whole family immigrated from Germany, and his family were Nazi. One of the distant relatives was a Nazi, like post official kind of thing. And so, they're doing all these background clearances and how
Right.
they treated Joe and how the bomb project itself, which was the second in secrecy only to the Manhattan Project, how
Right.
that was treated was because of that spy that landed at the same time that had the same
Yeah.
name or, close enough, one letter
So,
off. And so there was all these things and how, and I'm not going to give away what, happens with Joe Desch, but he had a hell of a time in what he went through in order to build this machine that allowed us to read Enigma in real time.
And there's a backstory there too that I talk about a little as well. That the British, of course, had been the pioneers in that particular technology. They built these bombs, and then early in the war, they had promised us. Bletchley Park had said, "Yeah, we're
Mhm.
going to give you a bomb so that you guys can start building your own," and then they wouldn't because
Mhm.
they were concerned about our own signals communication. And finally, my understanding is that we commissioned a sort of a R&D project with National Cash Register. Can we make these things on our own? And determined, yeah, we can. And then went back. Op 20G, which was our intel people in DC, talked to the Bletchley Park representatives in DC and basically said, yo, dog, we're going to make hundreds of these things. And you either need to play ball with us or you're going to get left behind. We're going to do 4 rotor machines, not 3 rotor machines. And, we're going to bury you. Are you on board or not? Stop monkeying around. Give us a bomb. Is,
Well,
is that essentially?
essentially, yeah. And I mean, there was a lot of back and forth with them. We, the Americans, invented a different bomb. There was Turing was very involved with the first iteration, which was based on the Polish version. And,
Right.
so they go through this whole process, and there's people that are in our own, you know, Op 20G that are working against us. There were those who were very just like beholden to the old ways of hand doing math to break code,
Right.
would not let go of that, like for to save their lives, honestly. And that, impeded the effort. But we ended up inventing this new version of the bomb for the four rotor, and it superseded the English version. And then we were reading it faster than them. And of course, it was a very much interwoven partnership, but it was not an easy partnership by any means.
Yes.
And I think as a result, we get absolutely no credit in that field because, everyone is like, oh, that's a British thing. Well, it
Hmm.
started as a British thing. And of course, we were very reliant upon the British, but it was John Tiltman who, was over there at Bletchley Park who came over and was kind of the liaison between the two that built that relationship. And Turing came over and stayed at Joe Desch's house and had to actually sleep on the living room floor. And, his grandson, when we talk about this, was like, there's no way. He's not the kind of person that would have slept on the floor, but he did. And, and there's pictures, and there's not him sleeping on the floor, but there's pictures of him at Joe Desch's house, and they're all together. And, so it was very interesting because all of these, again, like these interwoven parts that had to have happened the way they did in order for us to have succeeded in the way we did.
Right.
Because of everyday people. Joe was this like 36-year-old, engineer in Dayton, Ohio, who, you know, was like a champion fisticuffs guy.
Yeah, so not exactly the sort of person that you would equate to working in code breaking or that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of so. I wanted to circle back just regarding that message traffic that's going out via these various informants. Is this radio traffic, or how are they? If you're Joe informant on the West Coast and you want to send stuff to your Japanese handler or whatever, how are you doing that?
Well, one of the great stories is the Japanese doll lady who she was speaking in code in that. So she had a doll shop in New York City.
Okay.
And she was saying, she was using terms in doll language, I guess you would say. Like, the doll dress is torn or, the netting on the doll is ripped. And that would say like, oh, this barricade has been taken down. And or she'll say, oh, I will ship your doll to you in San Francisco, meaning, San Francisco is where the ships are coming. So there was these codes in her letters. And so she would be writing to what she said clients. And what she would do is she would have real clients and she would use their addresses as the return address. So they would go
Okay.
through the sensors as being, oh, this is a resident and we're just talking about dolls. But there was a code breaker who actually put this together all of a sudden and was like, wait a minute, this is more than what it seems. And then
Yeah.
she saw the invisible ink. So invisible ink, the
Pretty
microchip
cool.
dots were put in things.
Yeah.
Which I'm still amazed by the microchip dots, like for the technology at the time and the fact that they could produce like these, pretty in-depth messages in a little microscopic dot and stick it on a letter, and it looks like a period in the end of a sentence. It's like,
Wow.
things like that where there were codes about that, about Pearl Harbor. There were things,
Yeah.
and the doll lady knew about Pearl Harbor before it was going to happen. And so there's this, message in that if we would have known to look for that kind of thing, perhaps things would have turned out differently. Now, that's a lot of
Interesting.
ifs, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
those are the kind of people that were, everyday people selling dolls in a New York shop that was a spy. And, she was American, born and raised here, and became friends. She had lived in San Francisco, became friends with a Japanese, like club, and then when she moved to New York, she kept those relationships. So she was still very beholden to the Japanese and what they were fighting. So she worked for them, and we
Interesting.
wouldn't be looking for, this
A
very
doll
white
maker.
woman
Yeah.
in a doll shop to be a Japanese spy.
Right. Okay. Yeah, she was Caucasian. Is
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. Right.
Fascinating.
And then
Fascinating.
also, they had the second generation Japanese were they were all Japanese who were born in America, but
You
whose
say.
families immigrated. Right. And so that was essentially the core of that spy network.
Right.
So one of the things we've talked about ad nauseum, people are probably sick of hearing me say this, is
Let's
that
do it again, whatever it is.
why not? Let's beat the dead horse one more time. Go get the carcass. Is
Yeah.
that, everybody thinks that the United States after Pearl Harbor, everything we took, we had the Midas touch. Everything we touched turned to gold. And I always say, or I like to say in my very crude and crass way, is that more often than not, especially in the early part of the war, we had the brown touch, and everything most certainly did not turn to gold. Now, that being said, it's true. It's true. It's 100%
It
true.
is true. Yeah.
But that being said, and we're going to steer clear because we're going to talk about this in depth in a later date. The German U-boat attacks on the eastern
Mhm.
coast of the United States. That's what everybody thinks of, right, bam. That was the biggest threat was the U-boats, but that wasn't the only threat. And you kind of
Mhm.
touched on the spies to a degree. But
Mhm.
what else was there aside from drumbeat on the East Coast and the Japanese subs on the West Coast? What else was a threat to the actual American home front in late 41, 42? What was up? What were we looking
Well,
at?
it does involve with the submarines, but more so it was the technology that was being developed. And that was the scientists who were over developing the V2s, V1s,
Mm.
V2s were also working on submerged rockets that they could fire from submarines.
Huh.
And, most people believe those came later, like Cold War era. But I actually have footage of the rocket tests in June, I think, of 1942. And this was, there was Ernst Steinhoff, who was the guidance control, like the chief technician for guidance control on the V2 program.
Okay.
He was working on that, and his brother was the submarine captain of the U-511. And so they were kind of collaborating and doing these tests with, von Braun and the gang over at Peenemünde,
Yeah.
where they were doing this. So we're starting to get intelligence that submerged rocket capabilities are possible.
A
So,
threat. Yeah.
and so that seed's starting to be planted. And then, of course, with things happening in London and Paris with the attacks, by these missiles and whatnot, this is now in our heads that this could be something that's going to be attacking New York because that's, we had that
Right.
range. So it wasn't just that our merchants and were being annihilated and such with, drumbeat. It was what else can they do? How close can they get to us? And, they're 100 yards offshore landing spies in Florida
Right.
and New York and Maine or
Mm-hmm.
Long Island. And then,
Island.
so I think that was one of the huge threats in a sense of like what's coming. So
What
we're
else
trying to
can
get ahead
happen?
of that. And meanwhile, we have no planes, no boats, no personnel, no
Yeah.
no resources. And so, that in and of itself was to our own detriment because we got caught with our pants down. I mean, we knew World War was coming for a while and we were neutral technically, but it was coming. We knew and we weren't ready. And so
Yeah.
I think that not just for drumbeat reasons, but for in order to turn the war to be in our favor, that didn't happen right away. And we were
Right.
also not, everybody signed up after Pearl Harbor, right? Like, the momentum and everything. But if you
Mm.
actually look at what was happening in the country, that is not true. Like
Right. That's most certainly not true.
it was, I think that for the everyday person, they think the second Pearl Harbor happened, we were like, we're winning the war, America's here to fight. And it's like you said, things were more brown than gold. But
Yeah.
we it wasn't for a while till we finally got that fire under our butts and started doing, the
Yeah.
necessary things and to get us out of the hole we dug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of that was laid out beforehand. We've talked about this FDR shipbuilding, the peacetime draft, and all that
Right,
stuff.
of
But
course.
still,
Yeah.
you don't just flip the switch and everything comes on. Everybody criticizes Admiral King because of the convoy debacle, if you will, on the East. But
Yeah.
again, you got to have the ships with which to do it. And there's all kinds of different things. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about the American home front too, is that, it's much like the war effort. Is that after Midway, everything was great. And it's like, no, it wasn't.
Mm.
And that
No.
didn't work like that. And not
Yeah.
everything just, we had to borrow ships literally from the east, not from the east, from the Atlantic to land at Tarawa because we didn't have enough. And it's like, what? And like, yeah, things don't happen overnight, and that's a
Yeah.
huge misconception. And and something we could talk about too, maybe today or maybe later, is the lack of unity on the home front. And some of these things, like the spies on the East Coast and drumbeat and things like that, certainly did unify people in those respective areas. But people in Missouri could have cared less about
Right.
what the hell's happening off the coast of Jersey. They don't care unless they got a
Yeah.
son out there. They don't care.
Right.
And
So
they
and it's the
didn't
truth.
have the communication like they do. I mean, we think of the world now through the lens of
Right.
the time we live in.
Yeah,
And if you
right
think
here.
of
You get
how
your
long
news
it took,
right here.
yes, exactly. We don't have the world's news at our fingertips, and they didn't have that. And so, you know, getting news right away, if it wasn't right there in the front page of the paper, and even that was slightly delayed, like you're not hearing things in real time like we have that
Firsthand.
access now. And
Right.
so, what's great is there's all these interviews. That's kind of the man on the street interviews of, the days after Pearl Harbor. And half the people didn't even know that we were at war, what
Hmm.
was going on. And like middle America,
Yeah.
if
Sure.
you weren't in a major city, you were kind of like, so what? It doesn't affect me, at that
Yeah.
point, right? Until rationing comes into
Till it
play and
does.
that kind of thing. But initially it was like, yeah, I know, like that's terrible, things are happening and people were upset by it, of course, but their day-to-day life was not affected yet.
Hmm.
And so to them it was, they didn't have social media telling them how they needed to feel about everything.
Right.
Well put.
Right.
Well put. And that's something that I 100% agree with you, is that, it didn't affect them until it did. And then when it did, be it through the draft or rationing, or I can't get tires, or,
Right. I
I
can't buy a new car.
right, or
Yeah.
I can't buy any hamburger this week. That's when people started to care, and which of course means that they were just bitching more often than not,
Yeah.
which is the truth. But that's a huge misconception that we've tried to rectify here and there, that we'll definitely have to set straight.
Yeah.
One of the things also about the early war period that just never ceases to kind of crack me up is you'll find these various books about one aspect of 42 or 43, and people always will point fingers and say, it's just it's criminal that this one particular, category of armament, was not available in greater numbers. It's like nobody had anything, there was
Right.
not a single category of arms that we had in abundance at the beginning of this war. And of course it was going to be that way because you had isolationist politicians who were making absolutely sure that there could not be abundance. I mean, that's just it's the nature of the beast. You're to your point that yeah, we had all seen this coming, but there were a lot of people on one side of the political spectrum who were
Mhm.
like, no, we don't. Even though the rational part of us would say yes, there's a war probably coming. We're going to fight against any sort of preparations for that. So now we got to pay the piper.
Right. And I mean, we were essentially inventing like most of the technology as we're going,
Yep.
technology and ships. I mean, certain types of ships didn't even exist. Calculators didn't exist, like so we're wanting all these things and expecting these things and looking at things in the rearview mirror. Why didn't we have this? Why didn't we do this?
Right.
Why didn't that? Because it didn't exist yet. And there
Yeah.
still had to be these people on the home front who stayed back and figured out how to make this happen or to take a need and say, yes. And I mean, even with Vannevar Bush, like him fighting to say, like, we need to have civilians in government positions in order or in military positions to help design these things because, that's where those worlds started to meld was this need for technology. Like the Germans were way, way, way ahead of us in certain areas. And in order
Yeah.
to meet that, we had to have the brightest minds. Well, those
Right.
weren't at the time, it might not necessarily have been military, engineers that
Right.
were doing that kind of work. It was the scientists and these everyday folk that were not in the services that had to, instantly become reservists and
Right.
be in the military. So that was a huge part of it too. And that all takes time. Like, you know, the things that they created in the time they had are incredible. Like,
Yeah.
I think we take that for granted.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's a go ahead, John.
No, no. Do you think?
I was going to say that's a perfect segue to talking about civilians and reservists because when you think of the home front, you think of, like you said earlier, Rosie the Riveter and
Hmm.
scrap drives and kids running around picking up tin cans and all this other stuff, which is true. All that happened,
Hmm.
but civilians and reservists played a huge role in a lot of the things that made things like Tarawa or Overlord
Hmm.
succeed. And talk about some of that to enlighten us on some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there, for the intelligence side of things, there was a voluntary services program, and
Sure.
essentially these were lawyers, these were newspapermen, these were, engineers, and were given, like a month training and a uniform, and didn't even know how to wear the uniform,
Right.
and were all of a sudden officers.
You're right. Yeah, or colonels.
And so these folks, like, there's one gentleman who he was a newspaperman in New York, and he ended up working for one of the highest level intelligence agencies in New York for the Navy and, looking for, communists. He was essentially like kind of our spy, our, on our side of things. And they're working with the mob and they're doing all these bringing in
We're gonna
operatives.
we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to
Yes.
that
Oh yeah.
because I want to get to
There's a
that. We're
mob
gonna get
angle.
there.
Anyway, go on.
But these were everyday people. These weren't military, but these were the people and that was something like 90% of that department, like naval intelligence was mostly civilian. Same with the code breakers. Those were all civilians who were made reservists who
Yeah.
now are, Navy men all of a sudden. So that these people were the ones who maybe were too old to go over and fight or were too, and not, I don't want to say too intelligent, but too, very niche specific intelligence
Sure.
where they have, they are engineers and they can do this thing. So they have to be stateside and they can't go fight overseas. But like a huge majority of the people that stayed on the home front were reservists, were not military individuals in any capacity, and who were made military in order to do these jobs. And then as soon as the war ended, they went back to their jobs.
Yeah.
And so, the reservists, whether it been Coast Guard doing patrols, the auxiliaries, there are people with their own boats who are kind
Yeah.
of like, you know, every kind of boat you can think of, from almost like, a dinghy to
Yeah.
to a, a high sails, yacht.
Which is just kind of pathetic and laughable in a certain sense too. I mean, that we would have the audacity to send, someone's private yacht out as a naval auxiliary to fight a U-boat. I just that
Right? And what are they going to do when they get the U-boat?
well,
Like,
that's the thing, right?
but
What are
they
you going to do when you
went
catch the
and
tiger
they,
by the tail, you know?
Yeah,
yeah. But it was those people who were flying their own planes. I mean, one of my favorite characters in the book is Wynette Farr, who's a Civil Air Patrolman, and he's a cardboard salesman from like New Jersey. And
God bless him.
he like can barely get in and out of the plane. He's like kind of this tubby older dude.
yeah,
And he gets in the plane and he's the one testing whether or not they can put bombs essentially on their Corsairs or their Fairchilds. And it was, in good part, those are the people that bought us the time we needed to invent the technology to change the outcome of the war. It
right.
was, they were the ones that got us till May 43 when we could start tracking submarines, where we could start, the Phantom Fleet comes into play and we know what's happening in the Atlantic. So those yachts and those Fairchilds and the cardboard salesman and
Yeah,
there's this great story about women who they were called the Suicide and Sandwich Patrol, and it would sell jam and sandwiches on the side of the road to pay for their own gas to fly planes to patrol coasts.
what?
Yeah.
That's
So,
nutty.
and there's like all these little stories of all these people that did everything they could do in that moment to
Yeah,
defend the shores in the way that we needed to so we could get our act together and build our ships and build our resources and our
yeah.
military to turn the tide.
To take over that. Yeah, well, and obviously there were huge dogfights going on at a higher level between King and Hap Arnold around, trying to get military aircraft to patrol offshore. Because Hap, of course, was completely focused on using every available four-engine or two-engine plane to bomb in Europe. And like, what do you mean you're going to take hundreds, maybe 1,000 aircraft away from me to, fly patrols, endless mind-numbing patrols along our coast to, so there was all that going on. How
Yeah.
many civilian aircraft were involved in offshore patrol activities?
Oh, hundreds, hundreds. And
Really?
I mean, if not, like, I would say maybe in the thousands, but they put out a thing for the Civil Air Patrol so Civil Air Patrol was essentially founded like days before Pearl Harbor broke out, but they got their official charter on the 9th of December of
Okay.
41. And they put the news out, and like 40 something thousand volunteers with their planes and mechanics and all these different things that couldn't fight like show up to volunteer, and they're at like seashell runway airports, like
Right.
the most craptastic air situation, like scenario you could imagine. Fighting
Were
off
there,
mosquitoes, they have cows eating their plane wings, they're
right, because it's all
munching
cloth
on things. The founder of Krispy Kreme, he like puts his donut shop aside for a minute and joins the Civil Air Patrol, and he's doing patrols. So these are like they're coming from all over.
many civilian aircraft were there in the US at that time? I just find that
Yeah, there weren't
astonishing.
40,000 planes, but
Right.
there were
Okay.
the volunteers. Yeah. And
Okay.
so, but yeah, they were all the little, you know,
Hyper Cubs and yeah,
yes,
all that.
exactly. The little tiny yellow, like,
Yeah, the ones we see at the beginning of Tora Tora Tora, where she's out doing a
Stearman's.
training. A Stearman. Yeah, right. Were some of these
I
planes
like
coming?
Sarah's description better. The nyeh.
I'm gonna get so much crap for that.
No.
Were were some of these aircraft like flying out from Missouri or whatever? Did we have
Mhm.
some crazy people who are like, by God, I'm going to take my Stearman out to the East Coast and I'm going to look for, oh, yeah,
Absolutely. Yes, this
okay,
was their chance to be part of the war. And especially because, they were older to,
yeah,
like they couldn't enlist anymore. And some of them tried and some of them did go, but most of them, or, there's one gentleman who had two prosthetic legs And he was like one of the best pilots for the Civil Air Patrol. He's running like hundreds and hundreds of patrols, even
Right.
into Mexico, and because he was in El Paso. So they're all over the country. This is not just coastal. There were coastal patrols who were the ones that were looking for the I boats and the U boats.
Yeah.
But the Civil Air Patrol itself was all like this network. They were doing mail delivery, they were doing forest fires, they were doing all the things so that our resources could go overseas,
Got
that,
it.
war
Take the weight
resources.
off. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I have to assume that at least some percentage of these planes were being piloted by women too. Yes.
Yes, yes. They were not supposed to be doing the coastal patrols. There were instances of women doing coastal patrols, but
Yeah.
mostly they were doing plane transport. They were
Yes.
doing mail courier system, that kind of thing. But there were quite a few women, and in fact, Willa Brown was an African American woman who she started the unit for African American Civil Air Patrol, and she went on. They trained a lot of the Tuskegee guys, and
Oh, okay.
so she was one of the first officers to, both women, a woman and a black woman. She held that distinguished role of being an officer in the Civil Air Patrol and was
Right.
highly regarded for what she did. And so there were quite a few women, and there was one woman who she passed away not too long ago, but her name was Johnny Pantinelli, and she was up in Long Island, and she was the sassiest sasser I've
With a
ever
name
met.
like that, you have to be.
I was going to say, yeah, that just screams Long Island.
Yes. Oh, she was fantastic. And she was a spotter. So the women were spotters a lot of times too. And so they all wanted her with because she was so good at it. So she was the spotting the U-boats, and she was,
Mm, I
calling
believe
out
you.
if people, Civil Air Patrol was also involved in search and rescue a lot of times in the coast. So
Sure.
if one of the merchant ships was sunk, they would be the ones looking for survivors. So that
Got
kind
it.
of thing. But yeah, she was feisty and fantastic, and she served. To go back, part of the Civil Air Patrol, what they did is they started the cadet program in the war. And that's what started feeding into our air forces, or what would become our air
Mm.
forces. And they still exist today. It's like this fantastic, cadet program through Civil Air Patrol. And Johnny was like in her unit all the way up, I think, until like a couple months before she passed away. Like she was still
Wow.
going to the weekly meetings. And
That's cool.
yeah, so
Awesome.
and like they named the unit after her
Right.
in that area. And anyway, she was great, and she gave me a lot of like really good insight into like what it was like, during that time, and what it was like for a woman, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
A lot of women involved in code breaking activities too. I would.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
especially with the bomb. And I have to say, like, it's the BOMBE bomb. I wish
Yes.
there was another way to say it,
BOMBE.
Not
American
the
Yeah.
bomb.
bomb. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, but the code breaking instance, they were very involved in that, and they were the mathematicians, and they would go through special training, and also like, secrecy training, and could they
Right.
keep those, things to themselves and whatnot. But they really, especially in Dayton, Ohio, where they were developing the bomb, there was, hundreds and hundreds of waves that lived there that were running that program, and each of them had like they didn't know as a whole what they were part of, but they each had
Yeah.
their little department
Their
that
own
they
niche.
would
Yeah.
build like the rotors, or the tubes or whatnot. And so they had it was called Sugar Camp, and that's where all the
Oh,
waves lived. And a woman by the name, well, there was two, Janice Bernario and
Jeez, I've heard of
Louise Pearsall. Those two women were up in the higher levels. They were in the Phantom Fleet. They were in actually developing the bomb itself. So they were one of like five people that knew what Joe
all of the
Desch was
pieces.
building. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's an aspect of the war that actually fascinates my wife too, and she's read a number of books on that. And she told me a story once that apparently they had some sort of like a crossword puzzle contest that they were
Mhm.
running on a national level, and then the women who would do really well in that contest, what they didn't realize, it was actually a recruiting tool to say this chick probably would be a really kick-ass code breaker. Let's see if we can recruit her. Is that true?
Yes, very much so. They did
Okay.
that in a lot of the colleges. Women, were going, especially in secretarial capacities, if they were going to
Yeah.
school for that, because generally they'd be good at math or, accounting or something of that nature. And they would see patterns in numbers. So they'd be like, oh, here, come join this club. Here, take this crossword puzzle. And they would all be meeting up and they would have no idea what they were actually meeting up about. And they
Right.
didn't find out until they went through a lot of tests and a lot of, they would have people come, like, go to bars where they're hanging out and try to get them to talk about what they were doing. So not only were they
Oh,
tested with the crossword
Trying to
puzzles
bait them.
and things
Yeah.
like that, but they were testing their ability to keep a secret.
yeah.
So,
Can you compartmentalize? Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting. All
Very,
right,
very cool.
mob angle. I
Yep,
gotta
here we
have the
go. I was
mob.
about to say it. Let's
Bring
talk
on the
about
mob,
Lucky
man.
Luciano and
Yeah,
Meyer
yeah.
Lansky.
Meyer Lansky. How does this all fit into the story?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, really, due to that group, Operation Underworld, the Meyer Lansky, like you said, Lucky, Sox Lanza, Bugsy Siegel, all of those guys, they kept the port from, well, one, from having union strikes. We're like, nope,
Yeah.
we're not, because
Yeah. No,
We're
it's
we're
not gonna have a union
we're
strike.
not, there will be no union strikes, and uh or else.
Or
yeah.
else.
And they had, essentially that's what kept our war industry running, because that everything was going out of Port of New York. So if we would have had a strike, that would have impeded sending our resources overseas.
Sure.
So, no strikes. If anybody was suspicious, in terms of like Germans landing or foreigners coming or anything, they were on it. They had a whole network infiltrated into the waiters, waitresses, coat girls at the restaurants, all these different things. And that was all run by naval intelligence out of New York, who were those reservists. So,
Okay.
funny
How did
story about that. When I was researching this book, I started looking up, who's still alive, who family wise and whatnot. And I initially found Meyer Lansky's grandson, who is Meyer Lansky the second, and he lives in Las Vegas. And
Go figure.
yeah.
yeah,
Who'd have thunk?
surprise, yeah. And so he told me about his grandfather a little bit and more, and then I through stumbling upon other research, I found that he had another grandson by the name of Gary, and Gary lives in New York. I'm sorry, he lives in Florida. And I was like, I don't know how to get a hold of this guy because there's no contacts. And I found out he runs an air conditioning business. So I asked for a quote. And then,
Get
and
out of
then,
here.
and then I got to talk to him and was very upfront with
That's
That's
super
awesome.
clever. Look at you. That's amazing.
Guerrilla historian. I love
Yeah.
it. That is
I need a
freaking
quote.
awesome.
Amazing.
Love it.
And Gary was incredible. He told me so many fantastic stories. And what was interesting is that Meyer Lansky raised Gary. And so Gary's mom was Sandy Lansky, Meyer's daughter. And she's in my book because she would go to the meetings with her dad at the Dinty Moor. And
Mhm.
that's where all, the mobsters and the naval officials and everybody would go to the Dinty Moor. And so she was there when her father and Sox Lanza were kind of collaborating about how to get Lucky out of jail. And part of this was the whole like, okay, well, maybe we can offer them something to help them, with the ports and whatnot. So that kind of the
Right.
administration started there. But Gary told me, so Sandy grew up and married Vince Lombardo, not Vince Lombardi, but Lombardo, the mobster. And so Gary was telling me on the phone all these incredible stories about like how his, grandfather and father would talk about what was really happening in the war. And I was like, I don't know if I should hear some of this. Like,
Right.
so just, how they took care of things and how people would, not become a problem anymore.
I
And
bet. I bet.
Okay, and I'm gonna go hard nerd on you here. The name like Gary is suddenly putting in mind Deep Space Nine and Garak, the Cardassian clothier merchant, right, who's also a deep agent and stuff. So how many of the stories that are coming from Gary do we think are true? And then Garrick, of course, has that famous line, all of them are true, including the lies, so work with me, Sarah. I mean,
I mean, I don't know at this point he'd have any reason to lie. They weren't
Yeah, was
embellishment.
he going
Like
to
he
cover it
wasn't
up?
like,
it could just
bragging
be
and talking about
fun to
this.
lie. I don't know. But anyway, go
It could
on.
be
Yeah.
fun to lie. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
was more so that he talked just about how really involved they were, like boots on the ground.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, puppet masters saying everybody shouldn't do this, but there really were there were the different groups in the mob, the Italian, the Irish, and,
Sure.
Yeah.
and so they all collaborated crazily enough in order to keep America safe. And so these stories, when I say collaborated, I mean that's the most possible, like, polite way to say they took people out, like,
Sure.
to in order to enforce this. And so there's
Yikes.
no obvious recorded incidents that say, like, this person was killed by the
Whacked.
mob for
Yeah.
that purpose, but there were certainly a lot of John Does. So
Mm.
that's kind of the thing where it was, okay, this person isn't an informant. Oh, okay, they're not there anymore. There's an example. They
They're not.
relocated back to where they came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's on
Um,
vacation
yes,
Yeah.
in the
yes.
bottom of the Hudson
A
River.
long walk off a short pier.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
concrete boots.
That
So that
they,
happened. Yeah.
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 So there's and I do write about a couple of these very specific stories where there were individuals who were causing trouble, whether they were trying to stir up a union strike or whether they were, firing up the mob to say you need to hate all these people because fill
Hmm.
in the blank. And those people were taken, and I say taken out, I don't literally think those individuals were killed, but they were removed from, like, they were sent back to where, their
Right.
country of origin, or they were, kicked out of the city, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so, or they were arrested, like, and that's another thing that I do, that did happen, to where there is evidence of there being arrests where the mob was like, okay, this person is doing
Yeah. Go get
this.
this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, go get that guy.
Yeah.
So, um,
And
How
that
how
was
did the relationship? I'm sorry. So
I was
how
going to
did,
say that's how I wanted to what I wanted to ask is how deep was that relationship between the mafia? Because you said, it's a combination. Lansky is not an Italian last name, and
no.
Luciano is certainly not a Jewish last name, yet they all work together with the U.S. government. How deep was that relationship?
yeah, and who thought of kicking this sort of relationship off? Was there someone in our government who was like, yeah, we should go to the mob,
Or did the mob go to
or did
them?
the mob come to them? And how did that all work?
So the government, we'll say the government, naval intelligence met with, the New York government and with the prosecutors, and they're like, hey, so it was a guy by the name of Radcliffe Haffenden, and he was in the Navy. He was a Navy intelligence officer, and he had this idea because they couldn't, no matter what they were trying to find information about in New York, they could not get anything from the waterfront, from the longshoremen, from, they were told not to talk, right? And
Okay,
so ships are being sunk, things, off the coasts and
it's a
drumbeat and
mess.
whatnot, right? And then comes the SS Normandy, which had then, was being converted to the
Mm,
Lafayette and all that, where it was this beautiful Art Deco ship
Yep.
being converted into a troop ship. And this burns down. And right about that same time, one of our first destroyer is sunk by a U-boat.
Hmm.
And the people in naval intelligence know Captain Black, Hugh Black, that was on Jacob Jones. And so they know him and it's become personal, and they're like, we need to figure out how to do something. And so Haffenden's kind of brews up. He's known for thinking out of the box, and he kind of gets out of in trouble for it here and there in the past because he doesn't necessarily follow rules, but he's generally like a civilian in a Navy uniform who wants to be Dick Tracy. And,
Right.
and he
Love it.
goes out and he says, "Well, why don't we go talk to the mob and see because they love America. They hate Mussolini. They hate,
Uh,
what's happening to
really?
the
Okay.
Jews. They and
Okay. Yeah.
and so they go to the district attorney and are like, "Hey, can we set up a meeting?" And they say, "Okay," and they arrange it with Sox Lanza, who runs the Fulton Fish Market, and they and it's great because the first time they meet at Grant's tomb in New York City, and it's like 11 p.m. at night, and like a
That's
cab
just
pulls up, they yell, "Get in the car!" They go to Grant's tomb, and naval intelligence and the mob are sitting there having this first meeting. And there's a joke about it in the movie The Rocketeer where he's like, you can call me like a murderer or whatever, but don't call me un-American,
Yeah, yeah.
like
okay. Right. Yeah.
they that's exactly a heart of it. They were more offended by being, called unloyal to America than they were about being called murderers or, the associations with the mob.
Okay.
And that was one of those wow moments, like really, for me where I found that out. And I'm reading the transcripts because I have all the transcripts from these meetings, and the after action reports and whatnot. And they're talking about this meeting at Grant's Tube, and he's like, "Absolutely, whatever you need. I'll do whatever I need for the government." And the same person, the district attorney who is currently investigating Sox Lanza for a whole other crime that he's gonna go, in front of the judge very shortly, they're sitting there having this meeting about how he's going to help. And he's like, "I'll do whatever you need. I'll provide union cards. I'll make sure, bad things don't happen. I'll make sure, I'll keep an eye out." And then it evolves into more of they're starting to go on the ships. They're getting naval officers on ships as undercover fishermen to see if anything's
Mm-hmm.
coming in
Mhm.
through the ports.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sox Lanza's reach only gets so far, but this is kind of the gray area that there's a lot of signs that point to the fact that Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano and all of them were kind of puppet mastering behind the
Yeah.
scenes to get the Navy to ask for Lucky's help because he
Right.
was still the boss, even though he was in prison. He was still the boss, and so they reach out to him, and they say, "Well, we're not going to give you anything for this. You just have to do it for your country." But he's kind of
Right.
like, "Well, maybe you'll help let me, maybe it'll help later for my parole kind of thing."
Yeah.
But it's very well stated that he, would get nothing for it, but he's still, I think that was part of Lansky's and Luciano's and their mindset was we're doing this for a reason, not
Yeah.
just,
Sure.
but they were very, very patriotic. I mean, they were like, "We will do anything to help protect America." So it was kind
That's
of wild to me.
bizarre. Yeah. No, that's
Awesome.
wild to me too, I gotta say. I circling back to your earlier comment about the liner Normandy, which was just a gorgeous ship and one of the largest ships in the world at the time. And yeah, she burns, on at that New York quay. My dad, that's one of his earliest childhood memories. He was in New York City. He went to the top of the observation deck at the uh, come on, John, that big tall building.
Empire State.
Thank you, her. And yeah, he was like, yeah, we could see the Normandy lying there on her side, and yeah, I just never forgotten that because he clearly had never forgotten that too. And
Sandy Lansky talked about that too, because she was like 4 or 5 at the time, and that was the memory of her. Her dad. She
yeah,
lived where she could see the smoke from their apartment, and they were driving to meet Sox Lanza to have that first meeting about what they could do to get Lucky out when they passed the Normandy lying on
yeah,
her side. And she talked about how much that impacted her. And Normandy kind of became a character in the book
Mhm.
because of the evolution of like, she's the center of attention in the 30s, and then she's going to
yes,
be converted to a troop ship, and then she's burnt, and destroyed, and then what happens with her. And she, like, they decided to scrap Normandy. I think it was almost the same day that Lucky Luciano got sent back to Italy. So it was
Okay.
this like he's going past the ship lying on her side,
Right.
and kind of ties it all up nicely. That was one of those very nice coincidences in writing you get to have where
Yeah. It
yeah.
all gets tied up.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
That's
How did you
fascinating.
get into World War II just in general? What was the gateway drug there?
Indy. Um, like I started, well, I love the story of Indianapolis. I'd heard it when I was 13,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and it was in a documentary, and it was the ship that carried the bomb and ended the war and sunk. And it was one sentence in a documentary, and I think that was the hook. That was like, what? Like, what do you mean it did all that and I get one sentence? And so I
Yeah.
went, this was before Google. So I went to what is called a library.
And which is, for those of you who don't know, it's the words of a
It's a
comedian
house
friend.
of books.
It's a house
Yes.
for books. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
And they still didn't have really anything on it. And I think the fact that there was this kind of mystery, that's what pulled me through because I hated history in school. Like I had the worst history teachers.
Yeah.
And they just were all about dates and names. Just remember
Yeah.
dates and names. And as soon as you take the test, you can forget it. And so then when I started realizing there were all these really cool actual stories,
Yes.
with my
Hmm.
dad watching documentaries and learning about the people, then that's what drew me in was the more personal side of these stories. And the next thing I know, when I graduated college, no one had done anything on Indianapolis still. So I was like, oh, I'm going to make the movie about USS Indianapolis as a 21-year-old. And
Let go.
still working on that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I started meeting the survivors, and I think then, it wasn't just the mystery, then it was personal because they invited me to their reunions, and I got to actually start meeting World War II veterans and talking to them and hearing their different stories. And kind of they charged me with being their official storyteller.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, okay, I'm never going to have anything that I can do that was as important as what they did for our country. And this is what I can do is I can keep their story alive. So
Amen,
that's
sister.
kind of how it evolved. And it just kind of became this personal thing that I was like, I can do this for them because they gave me everything that I have. All of the like the wonderful things and all the ability to say the stupidest things on earth we can in freedom are
Yeah.
because of those guys and women, and
Yes.
so that this is kind of my payback to that.
Yeah.
Well, you are preaching to the choir on this end. I'll tell you
Yeah.
that
You
much.
are.
That's my whole freaking career, man. My
Yeah.
whole
No,
career.
Seth, that's very much true. Did you
Absolutely.
did you start basically right out of college as well, Seth?
Yeah. Professionally, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. Well, a couple years after college, yeah. But it was the same kind of thing, Me, I can't tell you how many honorary members of such and such company or ship or bomb group I am. I mean, I could, honest to God, um, dozens from interviewing all those guys and, from this unit or that unit or this ship or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I feel you. That's awesome. That's
Mhm.
all.
What was
I
your
understand where
undergrad?
you're driving from.
Yeah. What was your undergrad, Sarah?
Me? Oh,
No, Sarah.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say, you don't care about
I care
me.
about you. Care about our guest. That's right.
Film and theology.
Okay.
Film I can get. Theology, really?
Yeah,
That's a
world
two,
religion.
two, two very
Yes,
different.
yes. Well, you can't understand war and people truly unless you understand religion. And
That's
so,
true.
and
Yeah,
that, it
make
is
a good point.
the source of pretty much all the fights, that and love. So,
Right. Okay, so you came out of college, you're going to make a film about the Indianapolis. Your dreams were then crushed.
well, I
Right?
did. I did the documentary
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say
and
you kind of did. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then had the proposal for it was actually evolved into miniseries, more like Band of Brothers, because of the nature of Indianapolis. It was too much
sure.
to fit in 90
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
And so took it to HBO. They said, this is the best thing we've seen since Band of Brothers, but it needs to be based on a book. And so I had to
Uh,
learn how to write a book because I had up to that point was writing screenplays and working in film and television in script. So as you know, they're very different.
yeah.
And books need facts and movies don't. No, I'm just kidding.
Boy, that is also the truth.
Yes. I have a bumper sticker that says don't judge a book by its movie. And
I like
Also
that.
true. Yeah,
yes.
right.
And so yeah, so I'll make this version short, but met Lynn through,
Mhm.
serendipity, and we started working on the book, and we did the book, and then it kind of has gone, I still I still work in film and television a little bit, but more so this is kind of, let's say I'm finding more meaning in this space than in the Hollywood world.
Right. That explains why you're out in California and all that stuff too. I
Yes.
I was also gonna I do want to talk about the FOIA stuff.
Hmm.
And actually, let's do that first. So you were telling us a little story just before we started the recording here that you were like 2 weeks out from your due date on the manuscript, and then suddenly
You
all
get
the
a package.
FOIA requests that you had put in just ended up landing, and you just given up hope that
Oh
those things
yeah.
were, yeah, this is never
Because
going
it
to
was
happen.
like 18 months later that I got, that they came through.
Absurd. Yeah.
And it was, one was FBI and one was Navy.
Okay.
And they pop up like, here, ta-da! Not disrupting my entire life.
Right.
And basically, I like I told you before, but it was I want to say it was like kind of around 12,000 pages of information. Yes. And
Hello.
so, and yeah, and for one, like the one of them was, there's a double agent in the story named Grace Buchanan-Dineen. She was a German spy, and we turned her to become an
Hmm.
American spy. And they had caught her and turned her, and then they put her in an apartment in Detroit, and it had like false walls. It was wired so that you could hear everything in the apartment. They had cameras, and they had guys behind fake like wall mirrors and
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Wall
filming
Double
mirrors
her.
and
agent.
that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so it's literally thousands of pages of transcripts of all the meetings, and this changed everything. So it was like, I had this idea of who this woman was, and then I actually, listened to and read her transcripts, and she is like Cruella de Vil mixed with, I mean, you just picture she's got furs and her long cigarette, and
Right.
she's speaking at the YMCA, and before she got busted, she was speaking at the YMCA on how to do, relief for London, for the air raids. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, she's a German spy who's
Right.
doing this. So that's her cover. She's like doing all these society events, and she's calls herself a countess, and just this total character. And she's devout Catholic, teaching classes and whatnot, and then sleeping with like five people at the same time. And
Right.
so, there's all this, there was all like a lot of, let's just say, transcriptions of things that didn't make it in the book because it would have changed the rating. So, and the best part was I get all these pages, and it's like 2 weeks before the deadline, so I have to
Yes,
essentially
naturally.
rewrite the story. But my mother-in-law is like, "Oh, how can I help you?" And I'm like, "Here, take this chunk and just start sorting through it and tell me," because
If
when you
there's
get
anything
all these
interesting.
files, you're getting like some of it's just like, "Oh, okay, I approve this report," so it's a
Sure.
whole sheet of paper of what
Yeah,
you don't
that's
need.
nothing.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, help me. And she ends up getting the like the
The juicy stuff.
X-rated stuff.
Right.
And I was like, I'm so sorry. So, she's like, you might, I don't know if you're going to use this, but here you go.
I don't
Here,
know if you want to
I don't
read
want
this,
this.
but
Yeah. So bless her heart, man. She was a trooper, and she went through it with me, and so we did narrow it down some, but this character, I mean, so all of a sudden I had this incredibly juicy character to get to write about,
Right.
and and where she was an interesting character, it just being a double agent, but I had no idea the scope. And there's everything from her mother's testimony, who she was estranged from, and because her and her dad kind of, they split from her mom and her sister, and her mom and her sister were Protestant, and her father were Catholic, and they like she was a chameleon that traveled all over the world and went to Budapest, and that's where she got recruited by these Hungarian dancers that were training spies. And
Okay.
she could be
As
her
one
own
does,
story,
right?
her own movie.
Yeah,
And so someday, if this is ever a movie, she like that character is going to be really fun to play. So,
yeah.
but
So
yeah.
you made your deadline, it sounds like.
Well, no, it got pushed.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, yeah,
So
how do you go through 11,000 pages, and no, that ain't happening.
no, not at all.
So,
And so yeah, so it got pushed, and then the other one was the George Dash and Operation Pastorius and the spies that landed. And there's this narrative that has always been told of what happened, but it's really quite different when you actually read the transcriptions and what happened and George's personal testimony. And so that was kind of fun to turn it because J. Edgar Hoover was very involved in that. And
oh,
the
okay.
narrative that he wanted to be told was very different from the truth.
Uh, no,
No way.
What?
Not J. Edgar.
that's not the J. Edgar I know.
Yeah.
And people are going to go, but wait more. Enlighten us just a smidge because obviously we want people to buy the book and read the book, but enlighten us just a little bit. What's different here, or what was different
Well, in the version that
that we
most
digest?
people
Yes.
know, yeah, that's on Wikipedia, if you will,
Mhm.
Hmm.
is that George was scared and blundering and only turned on his fellow saboteurs because he panicked, and that the FBI had the whole case cinched up. They knew about the spies, they knew, or saboteurs. It was the FBI that did their diligence and caught the guys, but it was absolutely not. It was, only because George went to the FBI that they were caught when they were.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, yeah.
So
And
there's,
then just the precedent that was set, the courtroom or the court of inquiry, I guess it was more like it wasn't really a trial. It was a military tribunal, but it was a dog and pony show for the purpose of finding them guilty no matter what. And, you know, I have all of the court transactions, which was part of the many thousands of pages. And
hmm
so everything that was said, like you can't read that and think any of what, the public was told was true.
right.
So, but of course, that was part of what was, hidden and redacted and whatnot.
Yeah,
And suffice it to say is that, we had to show that we wouldn't tolerate spies like,
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
this
Got to make an
saboteurs
example
things,
of
and
them.
it
Yeah.
set the precedent. And then it also, for much later in how we handled spies, it kind of set the precedent. But it was really not on the up and up and how it was done. And like
hmm
and how, Roosevelt was involved, like I said, Hoover was involved, Biddle was involved, the Attorney General, like it was really eye-opening to see what was happening. And on one hand that, I tried to do it and I worked really hard to do this is to just present the facts and let the readers decide who's right, who's wrong, not to editorialize and tell them how to think.
Yeah,
And so, but it was, there were so many times where you couldn't be just so not angry at the fact that, like, how could this have been,
right,
how this was handled, and, not tell people to be mad, but I'm pretty sure they'll figure it out themselves when they read it.
right, right. I and we're gonna flash up a picture of just the cover of the book.
Mhm.
But I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because I noticed, again, circling back to Normandy,
Mhm.
that the art style on your cover very much harkens to these sort of 1930s era vintage travel poster kind of stuff, which I just love. I love that style of art. And you've got Normandy's bow there, which sort of mimics another very famous travel art poster of her.
Mhm.
But you did that cover, right?
I did. I did. Yeah. When we started out, when you know this, when you go to a bookstore or whatnot and you look at the World War II shelf, it's like tank, ship, soldier, tank, ship, soldier. And
Yeah,
it's like, I want this. And one is I really want people that haven't read a lot of World War II to read this because I
Right.
think it's the everyday person's story. It's not just
yeah,
World War II historians kind of book. So I was like, how do I get someone to first of all think, wait, maybe this is fiction and accidentally
Mhm.
pick it up?
Right.
And I mean,
Whatever works, right?
I,
Yeah.
Sucker him
Yeah.
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I loved like same thing. I loved that poster art style and so I started drawing the characters in the back and I'm a pencil and paper artist and so
I
I
was
don't
going to ask
know
you.
how to
Yeah.
draw on computers very well. So I
Okay.
did. I got the software and I watched the University of YouTube and I learned how to draw on a computer, to some degree. And then there was an artist who actually is very good at this who came in and helped with
Clean it up.
making it as pretty as it is. But
Right.
yeah, I really just wanted something to stand out on the shelves and be different and in that
It's a
style,
beautiful
in that
cover.
vein.
Yeah, no, I really like that vibe. And two, the design for my own book also has a lot of Art Deco elements because I just feel like we should be true to the time period that we're writing about, right? And so I just love your cover because it's so. Did you end up learning Adobe Illustrator then? Is that
Yeah.
well?
I've
God
never
bless you.
sworn so much in my life. No, I'm
Oh
just
my
kidding.
freaking God! Yeah, I I'm sorry. I have never been able to master the pen tool in Illustrator. It's like the most obtuse way of drawing a B spline I can think of. And so I use a different vector illustration package called Zara because I've beaten my head against Illustrator on a couple of occasions and just just I
Oh,
okay.
maddening. Yeah.
Maddening. Okay, good. Thank
Yes.
you for validating me on that one
Yes.
because
I
yeah,
got you.
okay.
The,
I
well,
I got
and the
nothing.
funny thing too,
I
like,
can't draw stick people. So
Oh, you and John McManus both. That's what I can't
yeah,
even draw a stick person. I mean,
yeah.
I feel fortunate to be able to do my own maps. I'm quite a good map maker, but I can't do poster art. And so, from me to you, I'm full of envy. I love your cover. I just think it's beautiful. So
thank you. I
good on you.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Seth, got anything else?
There's a
Well,
load I want to talk about, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
know. But
yeah.
there's also
But
a load I want to talk about later in other episodes.
correct.
It's kind of
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like the whole Falkenschlag thing, the spies and saboteurs are just badass. I definitely want to talk about
yeah.
that for sure. But yeah, we don't have the time for that. Well, Sarah, when does the book come out? It's what is today? Is the what the hell is today?
17th of
seven,
Today's
Feb.
the
I,
17th of February, so it's less than a month, right?
yeah, yeah, it comes out March 10th.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time this episode airs, it will be fresh. It'll be like about a week or so, maybe
Excellent.
maybe
Okay.
2 weeks after the book has been released. So we'll put the cover on here, but it's called The Dangerous Shore by
Mhm.
Sara Vladic, and it's pretty damn cool. So, and there's a lot more meat to the sandwich than we've talked about here today, for
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll
Thank you.
have to have me come back.
Yeah. No.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
got to
can
do that.
talk about indie all day.
we've
Right.
kicked around, we've kicked around doing some stuff on the home front, and we will. Not this, I don't want to say counts, but because it doesn't. It kind of
Mhm.
a, breaks the ice a little bit. But we've talked about doing some things on the home front because there's so many misconceptions about the home front that it just irritate me to no end. And
Yes,
I want to crack that egg, and get into some of that stuff because there's a lot of stuff there. There really is. There's
there is.
a
Well,
lot
and
of things to
the
talk
other
about.
part too, that I think is often overlooked is like, we know about the riveters, but the factory industries themselves and how dangerous they were. And those were kind of
Yes.
their own war front. And I think most people don't know with, DuPont and the development of neoprene and how explosive it was and how many people died developing neoprene and,
Okay.
things like that, where there's some crazy stories like that where, we don't think of that and, I kind of hinted at it before with people that never went to war but suffered PTSD. Like,
Yeah.
there's this whole set of individuals who were on the home front battling and not literally with guns and, and explosives and whatnot, but in the development of things that either
That went
led to
towards
nervous
that. Yeah.
breakdowns or, I mean, it's like everybody in the code breaking field had a nervous breakdown at some point from like Joseph Wenger to Joe Jash to, you know,
Yeah.
all these individuals. And so it's that, that's part of the Homefront story that nobody knows.
That
Yeah.
and as I think about that, Roger Wynne, who was the commander of the British sub-tracking room, he
Mm-hmm.
too, at the end of 1942, just folds up. He's been working 27-hour days and he just can't handle it anymore. He just falls apart. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be interesting to talk about at some point too.
Yeah, him and Ken Knowles, who's he's the head of the 10th Fleet, the Phantom Fleet.
Hmm.
And Wynn is, because of Wynn, Knowles became who he was. Wynn trained him.
Okay,
And that's the
didn't know
reason
that.
why we did have so much success on the Atlantic front was because of what Roger Wynn, who
Yeah,
was like this
he was a
hunchback like guy from,
barrister or something like that.
yeah,
Uh,
lawyer, like with a limp and,
yeah. And they
I
they
mean,
plucked him into this role, and his boss was just not very good. And eventually, in very short order, the
mhm.
admiralty realizes, yeah, this Roger Wynn cat understands what the hell it is that he's doing. I find that whole phenomenon of during wartime, during crisis, there are these opportunities for incredibly gifted individuals from weird backgrounds that just kind of bubble up. You see the same thing happening in Ukraine today, that the commander of their drone forces is some like civilian stockbroker or something that's what he did before the war
Mhm.
and came in and now is, in charge of all of their drone forces because, again, a very talented individual who just kind of like, yeah, this cat gets it. And there are so many stories like that in World War II, too, of people just bubbling up.
Well, and that's what I feel like is kind of hope inciting, but the fact that like you could be this super gamer and your parents might think you're a non-contributing potato and like
Right.
but that's the person that's going to develop the technology of drone or the where the
Yeah.
gaming translates to real world, whether it's strategies, whether it's um, actual operations.
Yeah.
And those are the brilliant minds. Those are the people, that when the call comes, we hope they rise to the challenge because they have those skill sets that don't seem
Yeah.
ordinary or they seem kind of quirky or whatever. It's like those are all those characters in my story were those people who
Right.
for no reason they were kind of written off for one reason or another, and they were the heroes that we never hear about. So
Right.
like that's very relevant to today and the choices we all make and the things we all do. And I'll get off my soapbox and my TED talk and whatnot in a moment, but but
Right.
I feel like that's where we need to look is like we underestimate certain values of things, and those could very well be the things that save our ass in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Last irritating question for you because people ask me this one too. So, what are you working on next? Which feels cruel because it's kind of like, it's
I need a minute. Like, no, I'm just
right.
kidding.
No, it's like asking a woman who's in the middle of childbirth, how do you feel about a third? It's just like, shut up and go away. You know, but what's next in the pipeline for you? Are you thinking about stuff or not?
Yeah, there's a couple projects that have come across the desk that I'm considering next. Lynn and I are thinking about a project together too that, join forces because it is way more fun to write together.
Mm,
So half the work. No, I'm kidding.
no,
But,
that's not.
you know, it's always nice. But the other side of it too is I'm still developing the project for indie and
Yeah.
possibly this shore actually to be married for a series, long form series.
Okay.
So have some meetings on that and who knows, but I would like to be
Right.
able to put my time toward bringing this to screen so that it has a whole new life in a different way.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Cool. All right. We'll
Good
knock
deal.
wood on that. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck
Thank
excellent.
on
you.
that. Good luck.
Yeah.
We need
It's
some.
not true crime, so I don't know if it'll sell right now,
Yeah,
but
really, seriously, right? Yeah. Open up Netflix and that's all you see is a crap.
I
That and
know.
Seinfeld, which I'm fine with Seinfeld, but
Yes. The reruns is all the good stuff. But
yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Are we good?
I think we're good.
I
Are
think
you
we're
good,
good.
Sarah? Anything
I think
else? All right.
I
Excellent.
think that's it.
And I'm already stewing on things like when can we bring her back again?
Oh, we
Because
got to do
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you
All right.
both so much. It was fun.
Absolutely.
Good.
No,
All right.
good
Well,
good
let's.
times on
And
our
now I
end
hope
too.
I'm not in trouble with the mob or anything for what I said.
Right? No, no. You can point them to me. I'm the one that's like, I don't know about Gary Lansky. I don't know if his stories are, so
You're
I'm
gonna get a visit from an HVAC technician in Minneapolis
yeah,
in about
exactly.
two
You
weeks. He
called
can be like,
for
I
a
don't need air
tour.
conditioning work. Oh, but
Yeah,
you do.
yeah, that's
You
right.
do.
No,
Yeah,
you don't
And
understand.
I didn't even
right.
tell you about meeting him for dinner at not Gary, but the family at the Italian club in Vegas, which is
Get
like
out. That is awesome.
which had a Frank Sinatra impersonator singing on a stage in like the, schmaltzy like
Yeah,
blue velvet curtains with the piano and it's dimly lit and the waiters and they're like
Tell me there's
that's
cigarette smoke and bourbon and
it
scotch
was
everywhere.
it was like straight
Yes.
out of Goodfellas. I'm like, "No way."
Awesome.
you're living the dream.
I
Look
need to
at
go to
you.
this place, and I'm not Italian at
You got to
Yeah.
all.
find an Italian friend. It's invite only.
Wow.
Shit. That ain't gonna
Okay.
work, is
It's
it?
like off the strip. It's as seedy as
Man.
you imagine. No.
Sweet.
No, it was really fun. Like the food was amazing too, by
I
the way.
bet.
But
Yeah.
Did
yeah.
they cut the garlic with razor blades like in Goodfellas?
Yeah. With a
I'd like
sharp
to
look in
think
their
that they
eye.
did. I'd like to think that they did. Anyway,
Yes,
Man.
we're
yes. It's
getting way
everything
the
you
hell off
imagined it to
topic,
be in
Yeah,
the
we
but
book.
that's
are,
awesome.
Yeah.
as we do.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching to this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. We thank you very much. Da 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 da. And I just lost my train of thought. That being said, this is the second to last episode of this season. Next week, our last episode of the season will air. It's another Q&A, and then we're going to throw in some filler while John and I prepare for season six and Philippines and Java Sea and everything in between and after.
Yeah.
So, once again, my name is Seth Paridon. I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Sarah, thank you very, very much for coming on with us, and we will be more than happy to have you come back with us again as we dive into some more of these really cool little topics. So,
Yeah, for
Thank you
sure.
both. It was great.
all
Yeah.
right, John, let's go.
Yep, I'm John Parshall. Thanks for hanging out with us again. And I'm going to do my best Sal Mercogliano thing. If you like what you had, you hit the like and subscribe button too. And yeah, we will see you all again next week.